my first words to my future father-in-law, your daughter's pregnant. My grandparents bought me this little framed picture that I ended up putting up on the wall when I was very young. And it said, with God, all things are possible. So that was kind of my framework for God. God was this God who existed and he could do anything. And I think the way that I defined that was he would kind of do anything that I wanted, right? That was kind of my framework.
Like a genie God.
Exactly, exactly, like a vending machine kind of God.
Yes, that's right.
So I was, in my teens, I was in a relationship with a girl for a few years. And right as she went off to university and I stayed back, she broke up with me. And I was absolutely devastated. And in my grief, in my pain, and this is, at that point, the most pain I'd ever experienced, I remember looking at that sign on the wall that said, with God, all things are possible. And I actually audibly said, we're done.
Wow.
And I took that off the wall. And that was the moment where I then decided I was an atheist. Because if there was a God, how could he have possibly allowed this to happen in my life?
Yeah, why would he cause suffering? Why would he cause pain?
Exactly.
Yeah, if all things were possible through him.
Exactly. So there wasn't a lot of thought that went into it other than I don't want any part of a God that would allow this to take place in my life. I'm done. So again, Romans talks about how we tend to suppress the truth, So that's what I did. So it was then really a whole mindset, a whole ideology that I adopted from the position that I had in life. That was my narrative. This pain happened. Therefore, because pain happened, there must not be a God. Therefore, all of Christianity, all of religion must be this complete delusion. So really what my life became was wake up in the morning, get high, try to sober up enough to function enough to go to class, come home from school, get high, try to sober up enough to go to work. And I worked as a bartender. And that whole environment was very much a party scene. So go to work and then drink and get high again and then hit repeat the next day. So it was a constant pursuit of something that would maybe in a sense kind of just kind of put my pain on hold. I was self-medicating. I was just trying to find something that would give me some kind of comfort, something that would give me some kind of pleasure, something that gave me even some kind of purpose. I mean, it really became the center of my life, was just getting access to the drugs that I wanted, engaging in the drugs that I wanted, hanging out with the people that thought likewise. But there was absolute no joy. There was no peace. There was just increasing misery. And I can remember in my early 20s, I'm in grad school, again, just by the grace of God, somehow getting into grad school and functioning within grad school. But at the same time, I can remember being in my apartment, laying down, like just on the floor in such a depressed state, and just I have nothing to live for. And I can remember just laying there in absolute despair with no answers, and nothing. And that's, it was then that everything started to change. In this bar and where I worked, I met this girl. And so she was working in the kitchen. She decided she wanted to come out and work on the bar. So I ended up training her. Her father's a pastor. And she had left the church. She had turned her back on faith and just ran headlong into the world. And so she was looking for the guy who was least like her father, and she found him. I'm that guy. And so we ended up dating very, very quickly, ended up moving in together very, very quickly. And before we knew it, she was pregnant. And so wrestling through that, I remember the first time I ever met her father. Her father is a big man, so he's 6'6", probably 250, 270, big guy, works out. And so they came over and they sat down in my little apartment, and for some reason, because no one else wanted to broach the subject, I was then given the the job of telling him what the situation was. So he sits down, and I was thinking, and I just got to do this Band-Aid thing, and he's a pastor. I mean, and who doesn't like children? Like, this is obviously probably going to go well, eventually. So I remember sitting down, and I said, okay, my first words to my future father-in-law, your daughter's pregnant. And he looked at me, and he just went gray. And then my second words to my future father-in-law ever was, it doesn't look like you're taking this very well. And in retrospect, I didn't know how well he was taking it, because he wanted to reach across and separate my head from my body at that point. But from that point, we started to engage with them. There was a period where there wasn't much engagement, but we started to engage with them, and every once in a while, we would go up and visit them, and I would be not dragged along, but I'd politely go to church. And I would be the guy in the front row, and arms crossed, the worship is happening, everyone around me is singing and hands up in the air, and I'm just like, this is crazy. And this is all it did was just kind of fuel in me even more of a rebellion, more of I'm putting my stake in the ground here, built up the Atheist library a little bit more, did some more research, and just like, this is insanity. And so over the course of that time, although I'd be sitting in church with arms crossed, when the preaching was taking place, there was an audience with my heart, and that's the opposite of what I wanted. But I was listening, and something was going on, and as I got to know my father-in-law, my wife and I got married. As I got to know my father-in-law, I got to see that he's a normal person. He's not what I thought a Christian was. And one day, he handed me this book called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and because he had established enough of a relationship with me, like he had built a relational bridge into my life, and then he brought the gospel over it.
Yeah.
He handed me this book, and I had no intention of reading it, but I took it. And I said, "Oh, thank you," politely took it. And then it sat on my night table for months and months and months. And then one night, I couldn't sleep. And it was about 11:30, opened my eyes, saw this book sitting there, and I thought, oh, what's the harm in opening it up, So I opened it up, I started reading it, and I was instantly engaged. And I got about halfway through this book, and the scales fell off my eyes. And I became absolutely convinced in a moment that Jesus Christ is exactly who he says he is. And in that moment, all I knew is that I know nothing. I know that Jesus is Lord. I know that I'm a sinner. Other than that, I don't know anything. I got out of my bed. It's about 3:30 in the morning, went into my bathroom, fell down on the floor, and gave my life to Jesus Christ, asked him to forgive me for my sins.
Wow.
And my wife woke up the next morning to an entirely different person. And in some ways, this was kind of like the worst nightmare.
Well,
C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity is a classic work of apologetics. While I've read other books by former atheists who converted to Christianity upon reviewing the evidence, to include books like Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Dr. Josh and Sean McDowell, of course, Josh McDowell, former atheist. Pastor Nate Penny's Journey, the 37th atheist to Christian convert covered in this series. This reflected a profound point about how his father-in-law established a relationship with a bridge and set the gospel to him over it. I believe with how often mere Christianity comes up in these testimonies of former atheist converts to Christianity, I need to pay homage to C.S. Lewis's seminal piece. But for now, I'll share one quote from this book that I pulled up. There is one vice of which no man in this world is free, which everyone in the world loathes when he sees it in someone else, and of which hardly any people, except Christians, ever imagine they are guilty of themselves. There is no fault which makes a man more unpopular, and no fault which we are more unconscious of in ourselves. The vice that I am talking of is pride and self-conceit. The virtue opposite to it in Christian morals is humility. From C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. Christ is the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, royal reign forever, and every knee on earth will bow to him, past, present, and future.